Well, I'm trying to get our doctor back, right? Like, flashlight. Wow. I never played this game, Dead Space, but I was always interested in the story. Let me fix this thing here. That's better.
I always liked its body armor.
Yeah, pretty cool armor. Oh, I could, let's see. No, it's probably not the right effect. Oh, come on. Software, work with me. No. Oh, here it is. Let's see if this what this does. No. Jeez, how far off do you have to... Oh, I see. Okay, it's doing the wrong slider. Oh, I don't even want to know what this looks like. Yeah. This won't work either. With the green screen, it does these some of these things don't work.
Why are you trying to make it more funky?
Oh, I don't know. Just to... There we go. I was trying to see if I could make it look more sci-fi. Okay, last thing, comic book. No. All right, enough of that. Oh, yeah, I meant to actually turn this on so that I could... Oops, this will go brighter. Okay, and... Manual. There. I was being blown out, which is why I did that. Let me actually, I don't know if I could share Photoshop, but I was going to show you guys some Photoshop work. I'm going to take this guy out if I can of the picture. This will take a while to turn on. This is not Today in EVE Online yet. We'll start that in about 20 minutes. So if you are hanging around, and I don't know who's watching, yeah, there's about 20 people. Yeah, Sci-Fi Cat. So we're hanging around and talking to Caleb and Wilson here with me. Oh, Rags and Leek are here too.
Hey.
We were talking about...
Everyone's in the bunker right now, right? And there was actually a joke on Twitter because Gilmore came out talking about the Serenity thing and said, "Oh, the greatest day ever," and everyone was just pointing out, dude, the rest of the world is shutting down because of all this Corona stuff.
Yeah,
you can't really call it greatest day ever. And then I just pointed out to Dirk McGurk that, well, he's excused. He's so busy in the bunker fixing Eve that he has no idea that this shit has happened.
Well, I think it's looking at it, it's a great EVE Online is about to take a real test too. Like, can it keep people together in a good way or a bad way through moments like this where a contagion is out there and that has to literally break us up socially in real life? Is the virtual world ready for this?
Well, I'd say it's almost the opposite, right? Because I think most people out there that are not like gamers, they might have issues of what do you actually do when you have this 8 hours, 10 hours a day that you have to fill. How do you actually entertain yourself and your kids, and how do you keep in touch with people when you suddenly have to only use social media? But to the Eve community, we've been hanging out even more than usual, right? And just talking about these things and sharing information, and it's pretty much the same thing every time there's like big events, elections, international crises, the hurricane in the US, all these things. We always end up sitting around talking about things and getting the feedback and help, even financially sometimes helping each other out, right?
Yeah. Can you say just a few words? I think we're... Oh, shit. Oh, no. Our friend, one of our friends that's been giving us a lot of information on the virus is in quarantine now. Doesn't mean he has it, but he's now quarantined. So I don't know if I should say who it was.
Which country
you
was
probably
it?
shouldn't at all say who it was.
Yeah, I won't say who it was, but it's somebody who's helping us a lot understand what's going on. So it's gotten close to him, which actually is not surprising.
Was this the gentleman who was providing us with like medical, like the medical side of it?
Yeah, he was giving us good information. He's giving me information now, but on text. Oh, okay. He doesn't have it. He's just in isolation as a precaution because testing is so slow, and it's slow in California too. And the United States in general is having, I think, problems with getting people tested. And that's really part of the fear that's going on too.
Apparently, I'm in the country that is currently number one on the charts. I don't think that is the actual real numbers, but we're winning for once.
Really?
Yeah, on most infected per million capita, we're actually number one. Yay!
Oh, I feel bad. Feels bad.
It's kind of a funny story because it seems as if all of the people, or the majority of the people that are the prime vectors, all came back from skiing resorts, right? One or two skiing resorts. So more than like 50% of the initial contagion came from that. So as I was joking with Dirk, this is like rich people or higher middle class people and their habits of traveling. That's basically fucking infecting everyone.
Yeah, Tom Hanks and I try to say that. I was like, isn't it interesting that like high level officials, high end merchants, these are the people that are getting infected. And she said, well, no, it's people who come into contact with a lot of other people, constantly being around other people. But it is also apparently, if you're taking flights or on boats, this stuff is, it's not, okay. So measles, I think what I've heard is that measles is a 10 out of 10 contagion wise. Like if you're in a room with 10 people, 10 out of those 10 people will have measles too by the time you get out of that room. And I think that, I don't know what the time period would be. Well, let's say a few hours. I don't know.
It's just funny, right? Ski resort people and cruise ship people are the ones that are getting hit by this. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm seeing a pattern.
Yeah, and that's not just touching things. I think that's also just being in the same breathing space as someone else, which that is scary because that means it's aerosoled, which means it's in the air. And there's a report out of Princeton says that, it being in the air can last 3 hours. It's not peer reviewed, so you don't know if it's true or if it's an outlier or how they got their studies done. But we started looking at some of the, I call it virality. I don't think that's the right word, and I'm not a scientist or even a hobby scientist, but the reason it seems to be spreading so much is because it's capable of spreading so easily because it lives long on surfaces. And the real scare was, does this mean if I'm in the same room with someone, can I get it, even if I don't touch anything? And it looks like, up to 3 hours, it can survive in the air kind of thing. And that's, I don't know.
I think technically you can get it, but it's very low probability. It's more from touching something that has the virus on it and then putting that on your nose or on your mouth or whatever. And that's how most people get it.
Yeah. And coughing space, I think that's what they mean by aerosol, maybe. And that makes more sense. But I'm starting to hear stuff like actually just breathing in the same space. No, okay. First of all, ton of bad information out there. Ton of bad information out there.
So the high school, the high school bio class of how viruses travel is exposure, incubation, and then contagion. So like you have to one, be exposed to a virus. Two, it has to incubate in your biological system, and then three, then you become contagious.
Yeah, but we're talking about transmission, which is before.
Yeah. Before you even.
Well, no. Yeah, but exposure is where the transmission occurs, and then there's like this is a little bit more higher level, but like viruses aren't considered living, so they have like a protein sheath on them that protects them from exterior elements. Otherwise, they rapidly break down outside of cells.
Yeah. Anybody here have special knowledge of this, or are we all just reading stuff just so we know?
No, we are at the pure limit of what I am capable of in biology.
That's all I got. Yeah. Yeah. Me too. I've watched, videos from scientists. I'll tell you something though, in real life that happened. I was at work and our HR department sent out this really stupid email that said, I don't know, it was one of those that goes around the Facebook. And it was saying like, oh, if you drink a lot of water, it goes into your stomach and not in your lungs. And if you do this and if you do that, and it had caps, like don't do this, whatever you do. And then it had underlines for other things. And it was just like, and looking at it, I thought, what the hell is our HR department distributing that for? Well,
yeah, I got that as well. I got it from a friend in Venezuela, so I didn't disabuse them of their small hope because they've got nothing.
Yeah. So what happened was a few minutes later, another email came out and said, sorry about that. That wasn't very helpful and it wasn't vetted very well. And we're sorry we sent the information out. Now, it looks to me like our head HR person was just screwing up, right? But I know her and I know the situation. And really, that's the president of the company saying, you got to send this out to everybody. And, the HR person may have lost the fight saying, no, you can't send that out to everybody. So when it out, caused a panic. Everybody got upset and things clearly started changing in tone. And then a second email was sent out saying the apology and, not everything on that list was helpful, but some of it was, like wash your hands and all that kind of stuff. But the point is, some bad decisions are being made all around by management, not just in private companies like mine, but also in the public as well.
Panic does funny things.
Yeah, I think we all, I swear, like we think that we're intelligent and we're above the animal kingdom, but in some ways we are just reacting to the environment, constantly reacting to one another, constantly reacting to the environment. And all these things that were built for fight or flight are just being triggered and causing us to do some dumb things.
Well,
or ill-advised things.
Yeah, so a brain that evolved on the savannas of Africa isn't good at determining, what information is valuable and what information is not in an internet world. Is that what we're determining with this? That we're not capable of understanding the level of complexity that's going on?
No, it's more that we short circuit our system so that sometimes we can't think clearly.
Yeah, there's panic causes you to do things, to say things and everything, and panic is contagious. There was a movie called The Apocalypto. Caleb, you probably saw that, right? Are you there, Caleb? Anyway, Apocalypto, there's this really great scene at the beginning. I'll spoil the beginning for you. It's not the big deal, but they come across this. These hunters are out. Hunters are out gathering or hunting, and they find another group that's passing through, and one of them is really disheveled and says, "Yeah, we've just been chased out of our home," and he looks terrified, and it really shocks one of the hunters. So they start going back, and the father of the hunter that is shocked stops him and says, "You can't come into the village." And he goes, "You're carrying fear, and fear is contagious to I can't let you back into the village. So stay out here until you can deal with it." And I thought that was brilliant. That's the punchline.
Yeah, I'm not being fatalistic. I'm just saying that behaviorally speaking, people are not able to understand how much information is being thrown at them and then be able to parse it into reasonable chunks that they can then utilize.
Yeah. Oh, there's Caleb. I was just talking about Apocalypto.
Yeah, I was just rebooting.
Oh, all right. We're not going to last long on this topic because I'll end up just making everybody go into a panic. Just kidding. But we will transition over to EVE Online talk in just a few minutes, about 5 minutes. But we're hanging out and we're talking about this virus. I am kind of proud though that we did say, like, look out for this. This friend of ours, Tiberius, who's a doctor in San Antonio area, was telling us about it, and he was really really good at telling us that the real problem is going to happen later when so many people are needing medical care and the medical system is just overwhelmed because you don't have that many isolation chambers and even respirators that you need to get people through the hardest part of this thing, and much less the isolation aspect to it. So hospitals in general are going to have to cope with the surge that happens if it happens. And
that's why those speed bumps are so important, right?
Yeah,
to slow
exactly.
down the spread. And this is why I'm actually very positive about how people have been reacting in general. Of course, the hoarding mentality and the prepper, oh my God, apocalypse, that's to be expected. As was mentioned, we are beasts when it comes down to it, and we can't really turn off that reptile brain. But I do think that the things that people have been doing with minimizing the spread, it's been very impressive, really. I know that we were not ready for this, but this shows that we can adapt pretty fast.
I got a picture to share with you, and this is last night. My wife went to the grocery store, and I'll just show you a few pictures. Essentially, she went to Trader Joe's, and it was just wiped out. And apparently, they get wiped out twice a day. That's LA for you. So here's some images. These are, it's hard to see, but
Tiberius is here now.
Tiberius,
Yeah, I am here.
are you all right?
Yeah, I'm fine.
You don't sound fine.
My voice is shot.
Panicking about
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to panic, dude. Tiberius, the guy that helps us understand a lot of this stuff. It's good to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm glad I could be here. I just got home literally like 10 minutes ago.
What's going on?
Well, yesterday I got moved to Lackland for quarantine, and the day before, my staff tested positive for COVID-19, and So we all got moved to quarantine in Lackland Air Force Base. They got tested, obviously, and the people who were not exhibiting symptoms did not get tested. And because I haven't traveled out of the country or am not exhibiting symptoms, they told me that I could not get tested. And so they kept me on 24-hour watch. And since I haven't exhibited any symptoms, they told me that I need to go home and self-quarantine.
So no symptoms. How many days has it been?
It's been 3 or 4 days since the
Okay. And you should probably know within 2 more days. Is it a total of 5 days?
The time is usually between 3 and 5 days. My throat is a little scratchy, and I can't tell if it's because of my voice, and it's also allergy season right now in Texas. We have this horrible thing called ragweed, and it literally makes you feel like you're sick 24/7.
Oh, that's terrible.
For some people. So sometimes, I mean, it could be as short as 3 to 5 days or as long as 2 weeks before something shows up. But from what I'm understanding here in Texas, the majority of people who are exhibiting symptoms now, it's between 3 and 5 days.
So that's the range, but the majority of people happen within 3 and 5 days.
Yeah, that's what it's seeming like. Yep. So the crummy part about this disease is that we're rapidly finding out is that people are actually contagious before they even start exhibiting symptoms. And that was one of the important things that I was trying to figure out, is whether or not I was actually contagious. I just decided that I'm just not going to go to work for the next couple of weeks just to make sure.
Right. So you could actually be fine, and your symptoms even associated with something else, even if you do have a little scratchy throat, could be something else, because we're in cold flu season anyway, aren't we?
Yeah, we're in cold full season. I know that there's a strain of streptococcus running around in the South. I know that obviously allergy season's starting back up because all the trees are starting to bud, ragweed and all that nonsense. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on, and there's a lot of confusion going on here in Texas right now because of it. Texas Department of Health and Human Services is getting swamped. Nobody's answering the phones anymore, and the information that's coming out is really spotty at best. And the amount of cases, like just this morning, I think there's kind of put. I think the reason being is because there's a lot of people who are, who are speaking with the governor this morning, because the first case in Austin was just announced, which is the capital of Texas, and it's going. I think that's probably got the governor's attention right now, because Austin has one of the biggest populations, and it's also pretty condensed, because there's a lot of people who spend a lot of time close to one another, out in the parks, out and around town, so on and so forth.
Man, it's getting real.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that the governor's having some kind of meeting with Texas Department of Health and Human Services, trying to figure out some kind of plan in order to figure that. University of Texas has canceled classes next week. So is Texas A&M and the majority of the other universities in Texas. And they're exploring options to basically go online for the rest of the semester. And people who have to go to labs will just be, they'll just have to go in whenever laboratory time actually is.
Yeah. Do you know how the testing is ramping up? Because it seems like we're still in a phase where the testing isn't getting out there enough to really get a.
Yeah. Testing is absolutely abysmal right now. CDC is getting in the way of everything, and it's starting to really have an effect on things. We saw this specifically in Washington State. The CDC shut down a number of testing sites because they didn't, quote unquote, fall within the regulatory guidelines that need to be. So basically, red tape, for lack of a better word. That, I believe, is getting in the way of a lot of people actually finding out whether or not they are contagious.
Yeah. From my own perspective, we're nowhere near tests. You have to, I guess, ask a doctor, but you have to show symptoms. So anybody that's pre-symptomatic but contagious will never know. So they're starting to talk about shutting down LA school district. And one statistic I heard earlier was that like 38% of nurses have kids in school. And so how that system starts to collapse on itself when kids get pulled out of school, nurses get pulled out of, or a situation is tough for them to be able to do their job and also take care of their kids.
Yeah. What I suspect, and there's been some discussion about this, because the disease is actually is fairly children are fairly resistant to this disease, at least from what they have found.
Mm-hmm.
So what I suspect is probably going to end up happening is that you will see some organization of daycare of some sort for these children, in particular of healthcare workers, in order so that healthcare workers can continue to do their job and be watched, because it is absolutely critical that they remain being able to do their jobs.
Yeah.
That's quite a hot topic over here in the UK because they're keeping the schools open for the same sort of argument.
Yeah, so that is I believe that is probably the best thing to do in a lot of cases, but I'm not in charge.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a calculated risk, and
right.
so never.
There's also the factor that children can be carriers of the disease, but they'll be asymptomatic, but they'll be carriers of the disease and they can pass it to their family. So there's also that argument against it as well.
Yeah, so over here you've got a bunch of scientists running a spreadsheet, surprisingly, that's trying to calculate those two factors and see where they cross.
Right. So it might be different, a little bit different in the UK since you guys are so condensed as well.
Well, also, we're fairly unique in that we have the NHS, which is sort of a government-run hospital service.
Right.
And so everything's kind of already spun up, which is quite...
Right.
Not really that unique, but yeah.
Well, yeah, not that unique, but it's not a global...
Not a global phenomenon, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I guess what countries are trying to do now is flatten the curve, they call it, right? Trying to disperse the people getting it over a longer period of time to ease up the pressure on the medical system.
Yeah, they're trying to avoid that peak that you were talking about earlier, where there are not enough beds for people that are severely...
Does that sound right, Tobias?
Yeah, so I saw a really a nice, interesting. Hold on, I actually have a figure that I would like to show. I'll send to you. I've got to pull it up on my thing. So basically, the whole idea is to mitigate. Like at this point in time, we all know that the majority that it's estimated that the CDC estimates that 50 and 100 million Americans are going to contract this disease. So that's between 1 in 5 and 1 in 3 people from the that's conservative estimates. And worldwide, they said that between 100, and this is over like the next year, they're guessing between 100,000 to 500,000 people are going to die from this disease. and that's conservative estimates again. And the whole idea of this, of preventing the spread of this disease, is so that there's no unnecessary deaths. So, for instance, I don't know if you guys watched the Joe Rogan
I did.
podcast with
Yeah.
the gentleman from the CDC,
Michael Osterholm.
Yeah, Mr. Osterholm. He expressed a what was the he was talking about a physician from northern Italy who is literally having to triage patients on whether or not they live or die. And that's not something that you, as a physician, normally have to do unless you're in a combat situation or a mass casualty situation, like a natural disaster, or like some kind of like bomb or something going off. Like the last time America, America really had to deal with something like that, I think, was probably 9/11.
Boston Marathon.
I'm sorry.
Boston
Probably the
Marathon.
Boston Marathon.
Yeah, the Boston Marathon. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's probably a good way of putting. I posted the.
I'll check it out.
The thing, voice chat here. So the curve that you look at with that, the height, the light, the curve that the high curve with the purple bar there. There's no real, there's not a line there. There was something that I saw on Twitter earlier that probably expressed it better. But if you were to imagine a line, an imaginary line that goes through the middle of that giant purple peak, that is like the capacity of healthcare, or like beds of hospitals. And those people who are at the top of the peak would not be able to be treated effectively and could possibly, die because they're not being treated to the best of their ability, because hospital staff is overworked. If you look at the smaller curve and you were to still use an imaginary line to go through the purple peak, it would be, you could obviously see that it would be much easier to deal with those patients in terms of hospital capacity. I'm trying to see if I can find the thing that Twitter put out, because it's obviously not as professional as this.
But this gives you the concept of what could happen if life were to continue the way it normally does. You'd have a massive peak with a lot of people getting sick at once. And if you do these preventative measures like societal distancing, or you're not having big mobs of people. I'll put that picture up.
Right. Here's the one that I saw on Twitter. It does a much better job of expressing it.
Yeah, I was going to mention you need the horizontal line, which is...
the horizontal line is much easier to understand.
That's capacity of the medical system being able to handle, right?
Right, yeah.
Basically number bed.
So the United States has approximately 350,000 hospital beds across the entire nation. So if you were to imagine, even 500,000 people were to contract this disease in America, that's 150. That's easily 50% more than what they can deal with, and those 50% are at risk of possibly dying if they have very serious, very serious symptoms. There's one thing that's still not being talked about very much, is that there's still the possibility that people have renal issues. There's been documented evidence that people that have this disease could, especially if they're older, could have renal failure, or if they have underlying issues, they could also jaundice. But obviously, the main issues that people are having is respiratory issues. But there are those small, there's a small fraction of patients that are dealing with that. But that was exhibiting mostly in patients in China. And there's evidence to suggest that the disease that's being spread right now is actually a different disease that has either mutated or shifted itself from the original disease that we saw in China because of the amount of pressure that was being put on the disease during the initial stages of outbreak in China.
Oh, wild. What's that mean? That's the first I've heard of that.
So it kind of falls along the same lines of evolution. This is kind of like secondary factors of evolution. So when you put selective pressure, the proper term is called selective pressure. So if you put selective pressure on a disease and it dies off, so like let's say you give a disease a ton of retroviral drugs and things in order to help kill off the disease, it puts a ton of selective pressure on that disease and it kills it off. Whereas there may be another variant of the disease that survives that is less deadly and less deadly, but more infectious, which is the one that we're seeing the most out of Italy and China.
Okay, so it adjusts, or it comes back in a different form because what? It's evolution?
This is the concept that we're seeing with antibiotics. People need to take the full course or it comes back and it's resistant.
So I guess I'll rephrase it. So let's say that you have the initial disease of COVID-19. Okay. Mm-hmm. The initial disease of COVID-19 mutates into not a separate disease, but a disease that exhibits different symptoms or symptoms that are not as deadly, I guess is the proper term. The patients that are going to be treated most heavily and are going to be the patients that have the most severe symptoms. So that disease dies off because they get treated the most and they get the most attention. And because the other disease did not get as much attention, or at least the other strain of the disease did not get as much attention, the other disease will continue to infect. Does that make sense?
Maybe also if you mentioned the limit as to how far the virus can spread in terms of percentage of the population.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Just that another element of it is that generally it's said that I think viruses can spread to 80% of the population at the same time before it starts dying off.
The max spreadability for the global population.
Yeah, and so if you limit how many people it has access to spread to, it starts dying off before it reaches that. And China took that route quite aggressively.
Yes, they did. Yeah, so that is an idea that I don't necessarily think is going to work as well as people might think. So you're talking about the fizzle effect. So you're talking about just getting the disease basically to die off. But my concern personally as a professional is that when this disease, when they lift all of the restrictions and they say, oh, well,
it spikes again.
It's just going to spike again, much like the flu does in a lot of respects. Because this happened, they just identified patient 0 in China. I believe it was a 55-year-old man. And it went from, in 4 months, it went from 1 man to, I think we're up to 155,000 now, total patients.
Let's see.
So even if spike afterwards, after the restrictions are lifted, would that not be beneficial according to the images that we were showing earlier? As in, delaying the peak is a helpful
No,
thing.
it absolutely is. Absolutely is beneficial. I'm just saying is that
Not as a standalone solution to
right. Yeah.
Right now it's at 140,000, but some of the cases have been resolved already. But that's total cases recovered 70,000. So like 63,000 are still active cases.
So yeah, approximately half people do recover from them, and there's also a significant amount of evidence to suggest that even though you've recovered, you're still infected.
Yeah, I did know that the Ebola virus will stay in, and this is sad, but in a man's testicles, and he's able to pass it on. Now, this is my friend telling me, and he's a savant genius about some things, but the virus can still stay in the system and be transmitted in other ways. That's the Ebola virus, though.
And then just to roll back with what Tiberius was talking about with resistance and stuff like that, and variations, as far as I've heard, there's not been any confirmation on more than one strain. So there's not necessarily multiple variants or mutations. So we're not looking at that scenario yet, or at least it's not confirmed.
So I think Caleb mentioned the other day that Israel has instituted a 14-day mandatory self-quarantine for all arrivals, which is very.
Yeah, and the 14 days is pretty much now from when we didn't know the incubation time, right? But now it is actually out. They measured the incubation time, and it's about between 5 and 6 days, right? So they were afraid that it was a very long incubation time, and they had to do this. But 2 weeks is actually a very, very good speed bump. So it makes sense to do that because it's just our behavior. It's also the limit of our human behavior. If they said a month, people would be panicking even more. If they said a week, it's not really going to be functional. So the way that the governments are pretty much rolling this out, I feel that they're being very considerate in what they're doing and how. Of course, there's stumbling and buffoonery and idiots, but that's always the case. We're still human. But I think in general, people are really reacting pretty well, with the exception of the stupid toilet paper hoarding.
Yeah. Let's actually, Tiberius, man, we're like hoping that everything is fine for you, that this is something else, and all that, with all that seriousness and good vibes that we can give you. So you'll know in the next few days if you actually have the virus, right?
I suspect so. I don't. Yeah, I haven't exhibited any symptoms, but again, that doesn't mean that I haven't, or at least I haven't exhibited any like primary symptoms. But I am 39 and in really good health, and
so you may have it, but you may not be reacting to it badly.
Right, I may not be reacting to it to a certain extent.
Well, and that would be good for you.
I should be. I should know probably here in the next 3 to 5 days whether or not I definitely have it. I'm probably gonna demand that they do a cheek swab on me.
Sure.
Because my wife does have a compromised immune system, and that would be awful and terrible if something bad happened.
How are you navigating that situation at home? Like, do you have to isolate yourself from her as well?
Yeah. So what happened was I had my son come and set up our entire basement in that, and basically had him, and not even joking this, but I had him staple plastic wrap. Excuse me, just 1 second. I'm sorry. Had my son literally staple plastic wrap, thick plastic wrap around the door to the basement so that the air from the basement does not leak up into because the disease is very well studied to be airborne.
Ah,
to
it
be airborne
is.
for a long period of time. So, and I also had him go out to the hardware store and place a very, very fine microbiome or microbe grade air filter into our air conditioning so that it doesn't get into the air conditioning. And he went and got me 2 weeks worth of food, put it in the basement because the basement was converted to an apartment for my oldest son to go to college about 5 years ago. So that was lucky in that sense. But anyway, so that's where I'm probably going to be held up for the next couple of weeks, and I will be doing remote calls with patients for work. And I'll probably be sitting out of work for the next couple of weeks for obvious reasons.
And this is a preferred solution to like getting a motel room, that opens directly to outside, not like a hotel.
I think that self-isolating at home is probably the best way that you could possibly prevent the disease from in any way. The best way I probably went a little overkill, but I'm not interested in getting my wife sick. So I did everything I possibly could in order to try to keep that from happening.
Right, that's what I was getting at. I meant that since you're specifically living with an immunocompromised individual, you may have chosen to go to a motel room, and I specified one that opens like to an open balcony as opposed to in a building.
But did that get you in contact with other people?
Yeah, that's my my counter to that would be is that you can get into contact with other people, and oftentimes motel rooms don't have good air filtering, and sanitation is usually poor, and there
You recommend in
is
general that people stay home.
yeah, I think that it's the best choice is to if you're not being ordered to government sanctioned quarantine, you should be self-isolating.
Wow. We jokingly called this segment the quarantine in stations, but here we are talking about a real situation and how you're making decisive evasive action with these things are like extraordinary measures, but you have an extraordinary situation.
It's voluntary quarantine, right?
So my staff is being voluntold to go to Lackland Air Force Base.
Voluntold.
Yeah, voluntold. That's the old military term. So they're in Lackland right now, being monitored. But yeah, I'm in because I'm exhibiting no symptoms whatsoever, and I haven't tested for the disease. I am in voluntary quarantine.
Okay, so last thing I want to ask you is, so for the rest of us, for our information, like what should we look out for as far as symptoms go? Has anything changed there?
Symptoms generally have not changed, and take these symptoms with a grain of salt because it kind of it entirely depends upon your situation, and they also can mask as other things. And I think that's what's probably causing some panic among certain is that you're going to usually exhibit a dry cough or or like a tightness of throat. You're not really going to produce any major expectorant like you normally would out of a respiratory disease. You could end up with sinusitis, which is basically like a sinus infection, except again, you're not going to be producing any major expectorant. You're going to have generally a low to mid-grade fever. So low-grade fever usually is 99.5 to anywhere of like 101.5 to 102 degrees. anything above 102 degrees, and you're exhibiting these symptoms, you're going to want to consider going to the emergency room and expressing them like your symptoms and trying to get treatment for that, because your body may have an adverse reaction to it. And if your body temperature gets too high, then you can start to have some serious issues along those lines.
Mhm.
So dry cough, no runny nose, and a temperature.
Yeah, which is, name any other types of disease
Yeah.
in the world that have
Yeah, exactly.
those symptoms.
We're also in the time of year where those symptoms happen a lot. So
Right.
I wonder, what they're not reporting is how many false positives there are, or not false positives, but basically people get tested that don't have it, but they have symptoms.
False negatives.
That's it. Yeah. False negatives. I wonder how many,
I think that because of the way that the disease spreads, that I think there's a lot of unreported cases going around right now. And I think there's also quite a number of people who are experiencing, I guess, for lack of a better word, the placebo effect. They read on this thing, oh, well, if you have a cough and are exhibiting flu-like symptoms, well, you must have this, disease that is, everyone is talking about on the television. And that's, so there's like this unhealthy mix between this going on right now, which is, first, that is happening and there's people that are overreacting, and because people are overreacting, State Department and Health and Human Services on all levels are underreacting as a result, because people are having the sky is falling mentality with this disease, so they're not testing as many people as they should. And in my opinion, if anyone is exhibiting these symptoms at this point, at this point in time, the way that this disease is unfolding, anyone exhibiting these symptoms should go and get tested. There should be stuff like they've got going on in Colorado and Washington, where you literally can go up, get a swab of your cheek, and get a viral count, and they can test negative or positive for the disease and whether or not you have it. It's a lot easier than I think that they're making it out to be. And the red tape that the CDC is putting on this stuff, I think, is going to cost some lives and is going to cost some people some stuff here. And I think it's especially bad because here in America, we, in the capitalist economy that we live in, people can't stay home from work. If they stay home from work, they get fired. If they get fired, they don't have money to live. And I not to throw in politics here, but there's no way in hell that these guys or that the United States is going to do what some of the European countries have done, which is suspend rent payments, suspend mortgage payments. Oh, and by the way, that you have paid sick leave until the government lifts its quarantine. There's no way in hell that's going to happen here in the United States. If it does, I'll eat my own boots.
Not a chance.
Yeah.
Not a chance. And that's just going to cause this disease to spread even more quickly than what it is.
Yeah, I was talking to Caleb about it. Like, there's the personal struggles, right, that you and other people have, even if you're negative. But other people have the personal struggle. But we're talking about the societal conditions in the United States and how we're not really set up for this, because we lack. We have all the sociality of meeting in places and doing things together, but we have none of the sociality of being able to stop that in any way without falling through the cracks. You can't stop your work, you fall through the cracks. You can't go for care, you fall through the cracks. Cost you too much if you don't have insurance.
This is an example of what. Well, if we're leaving the whole bleeding hard socialism stuff behind, when it comes to actual eusocial behavior in animal groups, right? It's actually a benefit for the entire group, but it only really shows on big scales like this in times of crisis or on very big macroeconomic effects, right? So this is maybe a bit of a wake-up call. You don't have to do this because you have to care for your neighbor. You have to do this because you care for yourself, because this is insurance on a grand scale.
Yeah, this is, I mean, it's really comes down to a society when things are good in times of bounty, everything is fine. In the lean times, when things are bad, when there's coronavirus rampaging about, then all the cracks show. So we all know that we live in a society that lacks the proper care and regard for the individual. We're better than we used to be, but we're not quite there yet. And as soon as things get tough, you know, everybody's getting sick. Now all the cracks show. Now all the things, you know, oh, well, we don't care about our people, therefore we force them to go to work, you know, and then we make other people sick. And it's these poor decisions that aren't shown to us in the face when things are fine that are shown to us now.
Yeah.
And it's really about insurance, right? This is why we keep coming back to talking about these things as health insurance, right? It's about the fact that these force majeure things, when you get hit by them, whether it's your car getting stolen or you getting sick or anything that we have insurance for. Hell, fire insurance was one of the first things that got invented. You can't really argue against the utility of this. The value of it is that everyone just pays a little bit, and then the guy that then gets hit is the one that then gets the money. This is just a very useful way of organizing society.
Right. People frame this as I give money for you, but what Caleb is describing is that it is simply prudent to ensure, with an E, the health of the collective for one's own personal benefit. If we see no further than the bridge of our nose, then yeah, it's paying for somebody else's healthcare. But if we extend our vision just a little bit further for our own selfish personal benefit, it is wise to ensure that everyone is healthy.
Especially because of spillover effect, right? Which is maybe the most important thing to understand about the whole concept of insurance. If I'm not mistaken, one of the major issues with the fire in London was that the fire departments didn't necessarily want to go and put out the fire if there wasn't an actual plaque on the door that meant that they were insured and thus able to actually pay for their salary. So this is why it needs to be universal. You can't do this privatized bullshit, because then it's always going to be this, oh, this guy didn't pay, I'm not going to put out his fire, and then you got an entire fucking city that's been razed to the ground.
Well, the classic example is that, you know, I'm only drilling a hole under my seat in the boat. This is my seat.
Okay.
Was that the Great Fire you meant?
As
in the one in the... Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. We're going to get off this topic because we could go on for hours, and it's just not fruitful right now. Anyway, we need to wrap up and actually talk about some EVE Online, get people's mind off this thing. But we wanted to continue to tell people who watch this program, our fans, and not even just fans, but just our fellow players, that, you know, we'll get you information if we get it. I hope we don't confuse the situation. That's why we kind of listen to people in the medical profession like Tiberius, who really called out a lot of the stuff that was going to happen and still some of the stuff that could happen. And then he himself is someone who has to be careful with this because part of his team came down with COVID. And so he is now in isolation at home and taking extraordinary measures to make sure that it doesn't spread even to his family. These are all things that you can learn from, but it's not, we don't want to panic anyone. We just want to get information out. And obviously this is a very interesting angle on EVE Online because all these players are connected through EVE Online, the game. That's how we know these people. And people like Tiberius, being someone who has expertise in this, it just shows you the extraordinary type of players that play this game. So that's why we're talking about this. It's kind of fun, but it's also incredibly serious. And I want to just tell you from Los Angeles, we're starting to shut down. You see, the school systems are starting to talk about shutting down. They're preparing to do remote classes. My workplace is preparing to do a lot of remote work. And you've seen what happens to the economy yesterday. The economy tanked a second time. It tanked last week. It's tanking this week. Right now, we're down to 21,000, I think, on the stock market. And to give you an idea, that is where it was when Trump started. And the reason that's a big deal is because it went so high and now it's right back to where it started. That's how devastating this is, because a contagion like this it's not just a health issue. It's now an economic issue, and it's a social issue. How do we actually maintain our lives in the face of this sort of a threat? And what's interesting, I think, here, and this is why I say there's angles to EVE Online, is that we're all safe from each other. We're not in the position to contaminate one another, yet we're all still kind of together. And that's what a virtual world can do. It's interesting. Okay, so we're going to be right back. We're going to talk about some EVE Online. There's a new Pulse video out. We'll at least do that. And we'll do some other stats. All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Oh, Tiberius, one last thing.
Yeah.
Take care of yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Be well, and thank you for all the information.
Godspeed.
All right, we'll be right back.